Hello everyone, it's been quite a while. Apologize for not doing a video, and for those who may tune in once in a while or seen my past videos. The reason I haven't done them in a while is a couple reasons. One, been busy just with life, work. Had COVID, and luckily it was pretty easy, for me. Or easy. I was able to handle it, and so forth. And the other reason I've been kind of debating, kind of like what to do a video on, because when I do a video, I kind of do a little more infotainment. Isn't just about let me review these planes and so forth. And especially because I've done like airport videos, or like going over the different airports like in the city, like Tokyo that has like 2 of them and so forth. So that's kind of main reason. I haven't really anything popped in my head I want to cover or go over. But there's something I did think about. Maybe it'd be nice to talk about. It's about anyone that's seen the news knows there's been a lot of summer travel issues, especially with flying in I say North America, not even just the U.S., and also in Europe. Asia's obviously not fully closed, but partially closed. Like Japan is like limited, and South Korea's still closed, China's closed, Taiwan's closed, Philippines is limited, and so forth. But Europe and North America is pretty open for travel around domestically and internationally, at least between the 2 continents. And there's been a lot of issues, as I said. Now, what I'm going to kind of go over would be a little, I would say, be somewhat regurgitated. Like the stuff you won't be able to like not find it elsewhere or hasn't been discussed to an extent. What I will try to do, at least a couple things, is one, kind of give maybe my personal take about that, maybe like ways that could help in the long run. I ain't saying these ideas are like super well thought out or like some industry standard, but I do think some of the issues that you see with the airlines and airports were sort of soft brought and also kind of misguided, like just their analysis and like what they were thinking was going to happen this year. So, but anyway, we're going to actually fly around Berlin instead of pick a European airport and so forth. So kind of before I go fully into the flight stuff, I thought it'd be kind of cool to do a little, kind of like back to the airport series. This one's a little different. So this is Berlin Tegel, which is actually now the old closed airport. And Berlin was a weird city for a few reasons why. Some of it's obviously going to be history, but it's a weird city in regards to they used to have like 2 or 3-ish airports. None of them were massive, and they were kind of like in junction. Then they closed one of them, and they had 2 more, and then they in the regions to say now they got 1 airport, which are going to fly towards the end. So what we're starting at is Berlin Tegel Airport. That was the older airport that was built 1948 during the Cold War. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure. I think it was West Germany. I'm double checking now. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like it was a West German airport. So, and the other airport that probably closed. And then there was like another one that was actually used during the Berlin airlift that closed in the mid-2000s. There was like a third one I saw, but I really could not figure out much more like what it was used for. But now it's all at Berlin Brandenburg Airport. And that's kind of like where...
Left departure approved.
Sorry, let's just pause that for a second. That's kind of like the main airport in the hub. And there's a few things about the airport I kind of want to talk about before I go into the summer travel issues. But one second. I kind of forgot. I have these old voices on, so let's just turn that off. There we go. I usually like hearing them, but not in this case. All right. I am using one of the newer planes. This kind of DLC they did. So hopefully you have no issues with. Sorry, because hopefully you have no issues with frame rate and stuff. It's like weird. The frame rate's been going really well for a while, and it's kind of gone backwards in this game. So, but anyway, the reason I just feel like doing Berlin over Munich, Frankfurt, is when you think of international travel or like the major airlines. One sec, let's just turn this down a little more. Is you think of like Frankfurt or Munich, and there's a main reason why. Lufthansa, Lufthansa's basically like they're the legacy carrier for Germany. They're like the, I wouldn't say they're not state run. I think there are subsidies and stuff over there, but basically they're like, we think of like, British Airways being the airline of Great Britain. You think Air France being the airline of France. Lufthansa is the airline of Germany, basically, in terms of like global presence and being the major, airline. There's some smaller ones, like Air Berlin, which I'm gonna check right now. I think they're still in business. No, they're not. I take that back. Air Berlin is not in business. That was like one of the smaller ones. I think. Yeah, sorry. They ceased operations a few years ago, even before um, COVID. So, but anyway, let me get back to it. Yes. So what's weird though, if you think about it though, and this is why I kind of wanted to do the Berlin airports. That's better. Is for the capital of Germany does not have their legacy carrier. In fact, its hubs are kind of limited. So they have an EasyJet hub at the main Berlin airport. So not here. This is the old airport. So now this is like this. Sorry, this is the AI that did this. This is not like I bought it. So it looks a lot different if you see raw pictures. It looks like even though the airport's closed, it looks like there is still some service that goes there, but I think it might be just cargo or something like that. No commercial services at least go through Berlin at this airport anymore. So, but anyways, I was saying this, like Lufthansa's headquarters in Frankfurt, and they also have a major hub in Munich. So when you look at you look at like their hubs and long haul, it goes to those two airports, Europe as well. Lufthansa's only got 2 routes out of Berlin, the capital, and that's to Frankfurt and Munich. And outside of like Ryanair and EasyJet, which are low-cost carriers, they don't have really a major hub of any sort. And the low costs do serve a purpose, but it's kind of unique thinking of a capital having that. Because if you think about, like, let's say Washington, D.C., and that's United Airlines. You think of, like, London, that's British Airways, Paris, Air France, Tokyo, ANA, and Air Japan. Like, almost every other capital, at least let's say we're on the G20 or the developed nations of where you do have a global airline presence, has a legacy carrier, but not Berlin. So I thought that was just kind of interesting, especially about the airports, because like, they used to have several. Obviously, being you know, crazy how there's a wall that went around the city and split the city in two. So, and it's just kind of cool to see like how unique I would say for a capital of Europe or anywhere of a major economy in the world was like that. Also, I did double check this, but yeah, it looks like this was one of the airports that was also using the Berlin airlift. So yeah, just a lot of interesting history with these old airports. But fortunately, they were old. They were built in, either post World War II, even before World War II. Didn't have any room to maneuver or change, like add services and so forth. Because like some of the older airports were able to upgrade over the years. Like LAX and Chicago, O'Hare to an extent. St. Louis Airport's been around since the 20s, but even though it doesn't have much of the traffic anymore, they were able to add like new runways and expand the concourses. Unfortunately, with the Berlin airports, they just didn't have that space or luxury, so that's why they built the new airport that's become their main, the major airport. Where there's one now and for the whole Berlin region. So, but anyway, I thought that's a little cool. We're going to fly over Berlin a little bit. Over there's the, actually it's the stadium, Olympic stadium that was used during the Nazi Olympics in the 30s, but obviously, over the years, they finally got remodeled, and it was used in the World Cup in '06. So it's a beautiful stadium. It's just it's kind of weird. It's got a sad history to it, and it's like, but it looks like nowadays people accept it. At least like a very modern, not modern, but a stadium where at least people aren't like, concerned and going in and why it's still up. It's kind of one of those just sad stories though that where it was usually tied to. But you can say that for a lot of parts of Berlin, to be honest, including the Brandenburg Gate. So, anyway, so kind of to the summer travel season, and I said to pick Europe because I thought it'd be kind of cool to do Europe with this. So no one's surprised because they were projecting this like leading into it. It was going to be a tough summer season. It was going to be like, it's going to be a lot of people flying. Airports probably were going to struggle handling it, and so forth, so forth, so forth. And sure enough, all those projections came true. Now, some of it's not surprising. Obviously, this is the first, I would say, full summer. I won't say coming out of COVID, because COVID's still around. Cases are kind of up again due to the Omicron variant, especially the BA4 and BA5, which kind of causes, very high infection rate. But at least it's at a point now with vaccines and, at worst medicine treatment, people can manage to deal with it. For me, it was like it was not a fun cold. I had a fever and it was a couple days. I was really fatigued, but I was able to handle it. Really the worst, probably said the fatigue fever element was probably I lost my taste and smell for a couple of days and then came back. So, but at the same time, I didn't have any breathing issues. Blood oxygen was great. I was coughing a bit over time, during the process, but nothing. I've had probably colds are a lot worse, in regards to that. So, but with that being said, this is, because of that, if we take that element of COVID into consideration, then most of the Western world, and by Western I mean Europe and North America, has reopened. Now there's limitations, maybe like need a vaccine to get in and so forth. It's understandable, especially for certain countries. So, but it's now like a full travel season. Even last summer when I traveled a little bit, it's still like international travel is pretty much off limits. There was like certain windows that opened then reclose. So it's like there was just no. There was almost like it was like a brief taste, but it couldn't sustain itself. Didn't last as long. The demand was still below 2019 levels, and this year it's a different story. Excuse me, took a little water there. So now everyone's back. But there's a couple of major problems for that. So the first one, and this is actually a problem not just with the airlines, also with the airports. And I'll explain a little how they're a little separated. Airlines have been understaffed, and there's a couple of reasons why this started. So for starters, they laid off a lot of people during COVID. Some tried to sustain it, keep them on a furlough, but it didn't. It didn't last. Fortunately, this originally, this will last for a month or two or a couple months, but it didn't. It lasted much longer. It basically let thousands of people being laid off the airlines, and almost all of them, to my knowledge, American, United, at least here in America. I'm pretty sure same issue in Europe, like British Airways or Lufthansa and so forth. Therefore, when the demand finally came back, and it came back, it was kind of weird. It was sort of gradual. Obviously 21 was better than 20. But it's like, we compared to 22, there were almost like a 19 levels against. But yet you still had thousands of, airlines were thousands of people short from, let's say, 2019 or pre-COVID. So there's the first issue. Now, why haven't they gotten them all back? Well, there's a few reasons for that. Or at least, when you read it, it's kind of like about what you see around, let's say the job market in general. One, people, if they want to come back, they want better pay, which they probably wouldn't get anyway if they came back or rehired, but still, maybe not the pay level they would want. And then the other reasons, some people moved on to different careers, different fields entirely. They're like, while, there is, being let's say, being a flight steward and stuff, there's some, it's a little glamorous travel around the world, but it's grueling work, and, eventually people get tired and move on to a different field or something different, entirely. Even not even the airline industry, it could be somewhere else right now. So you have that, and you have to refill that gap. And with that, when you try to bring in new people who don't have that experience, well, there's a training involved. Like, I've been on flights where I've been on, I would say, sort of new or even sort of trainee people, and it's like, before they really get more on their own, it takes quite a while, not like a while, like a year, but it'll take at least a few months to, obviously even sort of doing smaller flights and stuff to get used to it. And especially think about long haul flights, those are veteran staffs. The long hauls are like the glamorous routes, like London to Chicago, London to New York, or Tokyo to LAX. You got your more veteran pilots and stewards and staff on there, especially because you're doing full service, not just like a snack drink service and that's it. So that's kind of the first reason. Lost those staff. Even though you might be able to hire people, you can't bring them in there instantly. It's going to take time to get them trained up to speed, especially with just how quickly that demand came back this year. But then the next reason is the pilots element. So a lot of pilots, there's almost like a pilot shortage, and there's a few reasons. One, obviously during COVID, a lot of them end up retiring, or I don't know the layoffs in regards to pilots, but I know a lot were retiring, and it's also an aging demographic for that, that area of employment, and that's a big issue in terms of replacement. In fact, that's been an issue even before COVID. There's been stories, going back to the mid 2000s or 2010s that I remember, concerns about staffing or pilot shortages in the long run, especially the growth of air travel and so forth. which maybe COVID slowed down a little bit, but clearly the demand that came back this summer has been overwhelming for almost all the major airlines, not just here in the U.S. but overseas. And then the issue of replacing the pilots is honestly, it's twofold. Like, one, you need to be trained as a pilot before you can come on board to an airline. Now, I have been looking in, I was curious about this. So airlines will reimburse you for tuition, it looks like, or at least help you pay off your student loans and so forth. Because to become a pilot, it's honestly, let's say, on par getting a college degree to an extent. You got to go through a school, go through the program, get your license, get certified, and then you can finally become on a Highland airline. But when that happens, then it gets even more complicated. You don't get thrown in to the pilot seat. You obviously got to kind of work your way up. You start as a co-pilot. But more importantly, they don't throw you into the good routes. Those are the seasoned veterans. Those are the people that have earned their right to the glorious routes. You start out like almost as a regional pilot. So if you aren't too familiar, but you've seen an airport, you see planes such as, like, let's say United Express, American Eagle, or Delta Connection, for example. They're on smaller planes, don't look very big. They're not big, usually about 50 seats, 70 max I've seen. And those are routes like Chicago to St. Louis, Chicago to Detroit, or Chicago to, let's say, Dayton, Ohio. These are like routes that kind of go within sometimes they'll go a little further, 3 to 4 hours, but not often for that. But these are routes to smaller cities, regional, even very shorter flights, and their goal is to service these less populated areas where there's still at least enough demand to surface a route, but not high enough where they warrant, let's say, a bigger plane like a 737 or an Airbus 320. No, it's usually, this is where they kind of do the smaller planes, and this is where it gets confusing. It's technically run by like another airline. It's like Air Wisconsin, let's say, or SkyWest, who then, because they will say, Delta Airlines, this is operated by SkyWest Airlines. So these are like smaller regional airlines and businesses that run these routes and flights, in conjunction with the major ones. So it's like a branded flight. It's just technically, it's kind of like outsourced to a company that's just going to be, dressed like technically, I'm not entirely sure the pay structure, but at least with the pilots and stuff, while they're working for them, they get those hours, they get those times. Same with the staff, like the stewards and stuff, stewardesses, and then they can basically, eventually they'll be moved on to, the ones that are truly operated by United Airlines. Let's say, like the 737s or the 777s, the bigger planes. So, but with that, after I explain all that, just think of the time and money it's going to take. For one, it's been hard to get new pilots because it's a huge financial commitment if you want to go down that route, and that's the big issue, I think, of a lot of elements nowadays, and that includes college and so forth, is that you're going to have to send thousands and thousands of dollars to join, to basically, let's say, get a degree, or in this case, get a license, get registered, where, and not just like any pilot license, but you're going to need to get commercial license. That means you've been trained and ready to take over commercial airlines. Like, this plane's a lot different to run, as you've seen in my previous videos, than the 737s, or let alone the 787 or the 777. Like, they're very different. Different control panels, a lot more elements to it. Like here, there's no passengers and so forth. Obviously, some other small planes have a passenger too, but you're not carrying like 70, 80 people in these planes. You never will. So there's that element. Then you got to get hours in, and you kind of start slowly, on these regional routes, and then they're grueling days. There's an educational video I think I saw. I think it was from Windover Productions. I'll try to find it and link in the description below. But that's like a grueling schedule too. Or at least, sorry, that kind of goes over, the Windover goes over those routes and stuff. But it's like a good example of those days though. Those guys can start in Chicago, go to Pittsburgh, then either back to Chicago, let's say another hub like Dulles or Newark, get off, switch planes or do whatever in Newark, then they'll send them off to another route, maybe down that time to Charlotte, then Charlotte back to Dulles, and then they're done for the day. Like sometimes they're doing 3 or 4, flights a day on those routes, with a little time off in between, but not much. So you got to start there, and then you can finally get them, kind of work your way up into the better routes. Let's say now instead of doing United, Express from Chicago to Des Moines, you're now going to do United from Chicago to Los Angeles. That's a much bigger, more prestigious route. And same with the staff as well. So that's kind of the airline side, really the big all of it. And that's actually on the airport, what you'll experience firsthand. It does include the layoffs or shorts they might have had on the back end. Let's say, their own baggage carriers or the ticket agents and booths. If they lost customer support agents, what about the staff that actually kind of run the operations centers? There's a big one, and I'm speaking of United because I live in Chicago, so I'm a little familiar with them being close. They got major operations out here. Go to their headquarters downtown at the Sears Tower. I still call it Sears, not Willis, or whatever it's called now. It's changed names. They got operations, understand where the delays are. And then they're like, well, we can reroute planes. We got to take a plane out and so forth. That's a whole staff. There's a whole back end there. That runs an airport operation, an airplane operation. It's honestly quite astonishing the amount of people it takes to run the whole airline and service. Now you get to the airport level, and that's where it gets even more complicated. And let me be fair, I said baggage here. I'm not entirely sure if all baggage people are employed by the airline or the airport, but let's say they're employed by the airport, which I think is more the case in Europe. Well, they've had issues in that, staffing shorts, but also they've had strikes recently. There's been some strikes that I think, actually I'll pull it up right now. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, actually, it's multiple airports. I am just one. There's been quite a few strikes in the European airports among their staff, especially baggage handlers and stuff. If you want to see, I'll link maybe some links below, but you want to see some horror pictures. Well, horror for me at least. This showed a bunch of golf bags. I think it was at Edinburgh Airport. Just dozens and dozens of top. Just a complete disaster. A mess, no organization. You just name it. And anyway, and you just add those strikes. You add the airline staffing shortage, and then at the same time, on top of the strikes, where the airport workers are probably pissed off, they're overworked because they're short staffed and so forth. That now they're going on strike. Obviously you need higher pay, which is probably also tied into inflation, a lot of other elements around that. But then you have that element to it. And at the same time, well, why are the airports sort of sad? Well, same situation as the airlines. They laid off a lot of people and so forth. And then when the time came to come back, some of those people have left that industry for good. Especially you think about the restaurant industry or the bar industry, especially at an airport. They're gone. Some have left for good, different careers, or going down different paths. Same time, getting them to come back, depending on pay and so forth. It's just kind of it's kind of a domino effect. All of a sudden, you went from really, needing really no one there because there's only a handful of flights, a handful of people, to now we got a fully booked schedule, and now we don't have enough staff to run the lounge. It's just kind of, and I wouldn't say it fully came out of nowhere. I think it's one of those things that it was really hard to prepare for, because for a while they're always debating when are we going to come back in terms of, let's say, full travel, full service, when are people are comfortable to travel again. And it all came this summer, but remember, if you think about it, it's like, why didn't we plan this ahead 6 months ago? Well, last winter we had the Omicron variant. Mask orders came back in my area. All of a sudden, people wondered, what does that entail? It's like, oh, okay. Then we had spikes in the U.S., and they finally came back down. I apologize at the mic there. So unfortunately, and this is the only slight defense I will have to the airlines and airports. I don't think there's any good way you could plan what happened in terms of COVID and stuff in regards to when you could almost, I wouldn't say easily plan, but had at least an understanding when it was the right time to bring everyone back, when it was going to be, people were comfortable of going back out again. And some were ready to go back out last summer. I kind of did, and then I pulled back in the fall, when we had Delta go through, and then the Omicron wave, the first one, before we really understood Omicron, how much it changed. And while no cakewalk or something you can't downplay, thanks to vaccines and treatments and maybe even past exposure for other people, it's made people able to handle COVID now. So anyway, so that's kind of a broad issue. Kind of really the main issue is what's really caused a lot of the headaches this summer. And there's stories out there. It's like, well, you can do this to prepare, do the morning flights. Yeah, it's like, look, if you want my opinion, in regards to first, okay, I kind of talked about the issues, so there's like maybe some idea solutions. But first, like if you're flying in the next month and a half, or even early fall, because it's hard to debate how the early fall is going to be. Obviously morning flights are usually the best, regards to least delayed. First of all, usually your plane, especially if you're doing the before 8 a.m., your plane's likely already at the airport from the night before. Otherwise, you're usually waiting for your plane to come, and that's where it gets complicated when it doesn't show up on time, obviously. So, in other words, also, in general, not always, in general, you don't have as many weather delays, which has actually been an issue in North American travel as well at times, which I'll touch briefly. But not always, because there's fronts and storms. But the big issue in the summer, especially think about, let's say, the heat wave that's going through in mid-late July, or another heat wave had in June, it's humid. And with that humidity, especially in places like Dallas, Miami, Charlotte, we're just, I just laid off 3 American hubs. Houston, United hub. Delta has one in Memphis still, I believe. But, Atlanta, their headquarters in Atlanta. You're going to get pop-up storms. When you get those pop-up storms, that causes delays. That causes issues. That closes windows when planes can leave and land. And you get a backlog, and it causes just a lot of problems. And that's also been another issue which no one can prepare for, is the weather. I got lucky. I didn't have any weather issues going into my trip. But I've had that before. I've been delayed overnight before by weather. So, a couple times at least in my experience. So... But anyway, so that's kind of a broad overview, like really the main reasons what's been causing all of this, and and it's kind of, I'll put some links on more detailed stories, but a lot of the baggage handlers, ground crews at the airports have just kind of been outsourced. They aren't getting paid very well. That's why it's a lot especially in Europe, a lot of issues in the European airspace in regards to their issues, and in the U.S., or both, I say, has been airline staffing shortages. I'm not surprised if there's stories of them being overworked because they're getting so desperate. Now, I hope they're paying them extra for that, which I think they will, or they had to, because there are some restrictions there in regards to airline staff. But yeah, it's just kind of a headache. But the long term, though, some of these issues have been kind of known long term, especially the pilot shortage and so forth. And that's kind of what's kind of led to where I think some issues, I don't know if it is entirely possible, to be honest, or financially feasible, but I think, airlines are saying they're willing to help you pay off your loans and stuff, or whatever they want to. Why aren't there programs the airlines are on, or at least in conjunction with schools, where if they want to bring you on as a pilot, then they'll get you through the school program, and maybe find a way to even, maybe not fast track's the right phrase, but it's okay, now we can coordinate you with our airline, with the actual flights we run after you've done the basic, get the license, and get you going, not this gap between this, getting your license and doing the process interview or whatever the process may entail, and get you going. I think there needs to be a lot more coordination with that instead of doing it on your own, which I think is a big, which I take issue with in this regard, because this is more this isn't like getting a college degree and going around what I want to do for my life. If you need airline pilot, you're training them specifically for a role. It's like training a truck driver for a role, which is a different issue entirely, but it's but it might be a similar concept that if you want this guy employed and you need him to be a pilot, then you should help pay and cover his training from the start over him getting it. And then for some reason, let's say he got hired in December 19, he's ready to go, and then all of a sudden he gets laid off because the demand crashed 80% due to COVID. And that's an extreme element. But we've had 2 extreme elements in the last 25 years. Last year, COVID. Actually, not even 25 years, 20 years. 2001, you had 9/11, which crashed. Sorry, terrible phrasing, but that killed a lot. Even more bad phrasing, but that destroyed a lot of the airline demand. And it took a couple years for almost on the recovery from 9/11, if I recall, or at least a good year. I mean, people were terrified to go on a plane unless they absolutely had to, because they didn't know what was going to happen just due to what happened in 9/11. They have COVID. Now you're coming out about 2 years later, but it's you see that gap. And you can't expect people, in my opinion, you can't always expect them to pay 30 to 50 grand out of pocket. And I think that's roughly the average when I looked it up. I know there might be some variances there. To get their airline license and be ready to go into that. Like, you should help more programs to do that. And I think some airlines are starting to do that. I believe British Airways was doing that for a while, or did something. But this is a global problem. This isn't just the U.S. I've read about it in Japan. You read about it in Europe. It's just, and yet they don't really do anything to help, incentivize that. It's like, yeah, the money for a pilot can be really good, but A, it takes a while. B, even let's say they come out making six figures, they are 30, 50 grand in debt right then and there. And that's been a big issue of a lot of people coming out of college. And then at the same time, especially in the airline world, you don't start out on I'm going to fly directly from here, Chicago to Tokyo. No, I got to do 4 flights a day going around the Midwest. It's like, it's a long ass day. They ain't saying the flight to Tokyo's a peach, but at least it's one flight. You're not getting off, switching planes. God knows that you're rain delayed and you're stuck in Pittsburgh, and then next thing you know, you got to coordinate back to the airline about how your flight's going to be late getting into Charlotte, and if that's enough time to even get back to Chicago or wherever you're going. So, and then there's stuff like, I could be wrong, so this is secondhand word, but I think even when I talk to a stewardess, they got to pay for the uniforms. So I'm like, no, stop that. All right, pay for the uniforms. Now they're really nice. I mean, they probably use it for other stuff, but they got to pay for the uniforms. I mean, they get a discount, but it's like, no, stop that. You pay for that. All right, it's not casual Friday here. They got to dress up. And granted, we can go in the weeds, well, I don't, comes to force you should pay for your ship. I'm not going to go that far down the weeds, but it's just it's just stuff like that. It's just frustrating. And then in regards to the airports and stuff, that's extremely complicated as well. I don't know which airports can be unionized, what aren't unionized. I know there's been the outsourced stuff, the contract companies. A good example, if you ever look at food, if you're at an airport and you get a little lucky and you see the food cart. It's like a food truck that goes into the plane, the hook on the side of the plane. It never says United Airlines or American. No, it's usually some catering company. The airlines don't usually own that. They usually kind of, or at least into my experience, kind of outsource it. And I do think they do prepare, the menus, and then they outsource it to, a company that can provide the food or, under their standards, cook it for them, whatever they need to do to get ready before it goes on the plane. But they don't, but beyond that though, they don't really control, they don't really, it's not really their own catering service. It's usually outsourced to a different company. You'll see the food in airlines even vary a bit. Now, some of it's simple, when I do domestic, it's always the same snacks, but it's like stroopwafels, it's not like they can't get that. But if you go sometimes you'll see different logos of food when you go, between different, not obviously different airlines, but even different routes in the same airline, which just shows you depends what airport you're at and who they're working with at that specific airport. So, and that's where it gets a lot more complicated in that element. It's how do you resolve those issues? And I think pay is obviously a big one, but there might be more. There might be benefits. I don't know. Maybe reliable employment, because after COVID now it's well, what job security I got? I'm such a high risk where, all of a sudden, God forbid, if we have an economic slowdown, then will I get laid off in part of that? And I want to be a little fair. Unfortunately, that is the part of an economic broad slowdown. People are going to get laid off. But for those that just went through COVID, where let's say you're one of the 36,000 people that laid off at United or 30,000 American Airlines, then you come back. It was well, when we go through another slowdown, the next 6-12 months, what job security is there? And that's where it gets complicated, because we're at will employees, but there are unions and elements, I think, in regards to the pilots and so forth. Obviously, I know air traffic controllers, they've been short-staffed, and that's a government job. And you have the TSA, which is also government. There's a lot of elements there that it's just not easy to resolve. And I think pay can help resolve some of it. But when I was talking about the pilots and stuff, that isn't easily resolved. Stewards go through a program as well in training. I assume the airline pays for that. I really don't know. I can't find much information on that. Just a quick Google search and so forth. But yeah, it's just it's really crazy, to be honest. How not all these solutions are easily fixed, especially in regards to airlines that might have older planes or mechanical stuff, whatever. But it's just, if some of the staffing shortages, I think they've been there for a while. and they've been really exposed right now, and just how fragile the whole system is. And yet the airlines don't really have any solutions because they don't know how to cover. And unfortunately, I have to be a little fair to them. They're still caught out of a negative hole from the last 2 years. It's like they're just trying to make up revenues. And I think I'll just be brutally honest, I think they fucked up this summer, where not just in regards to all the issues I laid out, but I think they've overcharged a lot of rounds, overcharged people because they think they get away with it, and they kind of did for a while. But now it's like, the demand's kind of dropped. We might go into a recession or listen, economic global slowdown. I'm going to say global because there probably will be a global slowdown due to a lot of macroeconomic factors like inflation, to the war in Ukraine and so forth. And it's like, well, you guys, I wouldn't say you had a golden ticket, but you had such pent up demand and stuff that their revenues were higher than 2019 recently. But fortunately, their net incomes didn't keep up because they were so overwhelmed and screwed up their flights and cancellations and delays that they lost money in regards to that. So they didn't reach even 2019 levels. And now the demand's concerned in the fall, it's still below 2019 levels. And it's just like, it's just unbelievable. I get they were desperate to crawl out of that hole. I really do. But they were so desperate that they really shot themselves in the foot to an extent with demand, in my opinion. And now they have these long-term staffing shortages and issues, and they have no solutions to resolve that. And again, I don't want to say it's as simple as paying more money and so forth. I just want to hear about the pilots and just the cost of being a pilot and just there's just no idea. It's like, think of something. As I said, think about covering the school coming out. Create partnerships and programs with schools. Get a company discount. Do something. If you desperately need a pilot and they're gonna want to go right into as a pilot, then why go through this hula hoop bullshit nonsense and to go out, spend $30,000 to $50,000 to get their fucking license? I mean, good God, it's unbelievable. And then at the same time, if you want to have an increased demand, obviously I get you want to increase the price on that and so forth. I'm not gonna fully stop you, but here's where it gets fucking ridiculous. So this is just a micro example, but I did this several times, and a lot of people experience this as well. Example that I was trying to go to Los Angeles around July 4th from Chicago. And I've done this route before on the same dates, same holiday weekend, in 2019 actually. So this is before COVID. I think it was about $350 to $400 round trip for my flight. Which is pretty average. Sometimes a little cheaper, sometimes a little more. I've seen the 500 range max. Almost all the flights, they're trying to charge me $650 to $750 for that route on all the major airlines. The cheapest one would have been Spirit, and after probably all my paint bag and whatever fee nonsense they sneak in there, probably would not have been much difference, and I probably would have hated myself for it. It's like, and then looked at the planes, because you can see seat selection. The planes are barely 50% full, roughly. And this is only 5-6 weeks out from my trip, so this would have been May when I last looked. I gave up at the end of May. Around Memorial Weekend, that was when I closed in and said, nope, I'm not spending these prices. Planes are very half full, and then sure enough, around mid-June, when I was randomly looked, kind of curiosity, they dropped the prices down to $500. They dropped $200 off. So it's like they basically realized, we fucked up. We were trying to squeeze everyone out of it, try to outpace the inflation rate by 40% from the 9% inflation rate. And well, people stopped flying. Now they are going okay, we're going to look. Now they're we're going to lower our rates now. It's well, too late, dipshits. You got gas over $5 where I live. National average is around $4. Groceries are out of control. We got the fall school year coming up, so families are out. You guys literally fucked up. And it wasn't very complicated to understand how you did. It's just you got so short-sighted. And I get to an extent because you were so desperate to come out of COVID. Now we may go into a recession, right? I think inflation is about to, I won't say it's going to peak, but I do think if the gas prices continue downward like they have been, this is July I'm recording this, if anyone comes across this down the road, that will at least roll into offsetting costs and other core elements, like groceries and stuff to an extent. But it's it's too late. And now you're having, unfortunately, jobless claims are going to have gone up a little bit because there have been layoffs in a lot of key areas, especially the tech world. And it's just I ain't saying I'm here to run your business, but just sometimes I'm just dumbfounded, just the very short-sightedness and greediness that just really shot them. And it's all of them. Not even just here in America. Air Canada, all of them. And now it's like, and the good news, they're not going to ever be back in COVID spot unless the next we have a new mutation, it's super deadly and shuts everything down again. But it's like, they had some of a golden opportunity they got to capitalize on, and especially in regards to the pricing, but, maybe try to, but then they did nothing, and then the experience was horrible this summer for millions of people, and it's like, I don't really feel bad for them because to an extent it was somewhat bought. Somewhat. Most of the pricing, and I think the long-term issues they had with staffing, like pilots, and how to handle that and so forth. The elements are not in control is that you come from very low demand to very high demand, not instantly, but very quickly, and it's not easy to replace those people that you lost. But just the long-term thinking is just not there, and that's what bothers me so much. There is no long-term thing. No long-term thing on the pilots as I've been hammering. Pricing, they finally, this fall, from what I'm looking at, they look a lot more normal what you would expect. Like back to LA is like back to 400 range, which where it should be. That's usually where it's at, for economy. So, anyway, kind of a brief rant. But yeah, it's just kind of, just seeing about the summer stuff. It's like, it's not shocking at all. It's just disappointing that the airlines just constantly did this to themselves and shoot themselves in the foot when they didn't need to. They could have, I understand they could have had this fixed and so forth, but it's just like, it just did nothing, That's what's frustrating. Like, they did nothing. They really had no ideas that even I thought of no background or experience in. And they could have done something, but they didn't. So, but anyway, that's kind of the broad overview of the summer issues, what's caused it. My opinion, why some of it happened, which I want to be fair, it is COVID, but self-inflicted, as I said. But that said, we have some cool, I wrote a bunch of stuff here. It's like, yeah. So I got some cool, this is more factoids here. I'm going to do some factoids about the issues this summer. Various articles, the articles from like New York Times, CNN, travel, and so forth. Nothing from the points guy this time. But anyway, so here's an example. Percentage of cancellations so far this year versus a comparable time frame in 2019. This article is from July, so probably been May, June. Traffic 2.8% this year in cancellations, 2.1 in 19. And that doesn't sound like a big jump. Even 2% doesn't sound like a jump. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, kind of like the regional flights. Let's say your flight, cancel. Let's say the plane goes to Pittsburgh, and the person needs to get back to Chicago to be utilized for another flight. Well, all of a sudden there's a major storm, and it got canceled. Now, eventually they try to get the plane out of there, but it's stuck there. It's grounded, severe storm, they can't get the plane going. Well, now that plane that needs to go to Chicago for the last flight of the day that might have in St. Louis, your plane's short. Now, like usually the hubs up back that plane so you can pull out of the hangar or something to get going, but there's going to be a delay. It's kind of like a snowball effect, especially delays. There's a delay going, then the next flight might get delayed depending on the window that it's got when it needs to get back to the hub and switch out, or at its destination when that plane needs to switch out to go to another airport. It's just kind of, it's a snowball effect. Kind of mentioned earlier about the European element. I got here, Heathrow and Amsterdam, shortage in terms of security staff and baggage handling mainly, also some check-in staff and ground support workers. Yeah, see? If you have overlay other localizations from baggage system failures such as Heathrow recent airspace limitations which were happening around Europe even before the pandemic, you get the hot spot and flare-ups that get the headlines. This is like someone I'm quoting. That's just was kind of regurgitated earlier. It's just a lot of staffing shortages. Oh yeah, this is I want to say a couple weeks ago. Heathrow said they're only counting up to 100,000 departing passengers daily until September 11 due to the shortages and problems they've had with security lines, lost luggage, and departure delays. In 2019, the airport handled about 105,000 daily departures. So they're now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but they're starting to limit the amount of people going through one of the busiest, most global and impactful airports on Earth because they can't handle the demand right now because they're too short-staffed. Oh yeah, this is a good one. So this one's worded a little off, but But so in North America, Toronto Airport in Canada, almost more than half the scheduled flights between May 26th and July 19th were delayed. And that's the other thing. So, I talked about cancellations. Delays have been a completely different story. It's just been outrageous, really insane to be honest. Then like a whooping 52.5% of the airport scheduled flights have been delayed this summer, as the data shows. They're also ranked 4th in the world, with 6.5% of flights canceled during that period, out of Toronto. That's Air Canada's hub. So both you have the issues in Toronto, and also by the issues in Canada, you get a perfect storm and they both come together when they both got problems. Slovenia Airport. Some of the world's top 10 airports in delays this summer, right by a percentage of scheduled flights delayed are in Europe. Back to my point, I mentioned the Heathrow, Frankfurt, which I talked earlier in this video. Just, all these major airports are delayed, and especially because a lot of people from the U.S. went to Europe, and maybe vice versa. Like there's certain countries, I think like Thailand and stuff, you could have come in. The rest behind me, sorry. You could have come in, to Europe, and obviously North America has a lot of its issues too, especially like Delta and United America, their major hubs and so forth. But anyway, it's like, it really just shows just how crazy it is. And then mentioned here, airports in Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, and London send the most significant delays. It makes perfect sense for several key reasons. Those are probably the 4 biggest airlines and hubs in Europe. You have some others like TAP Portugal. That's a good sized airline. But you think about the most global present airlines in Europe. It's probably British Airways in London Heathrow. And that's just London. I'm assuming they mean Heathrow and Gatwick, because they got 2 airports. Air France in Paris. Then you have Lufthansa here in Frankfurt. Didn't mention Munich. Munich's a smaller-ish operation, but still pretty big on long-haul flights to the U.S. or other parts of the world. And then Amsterdam is KLM, which is a huge airline as well. And that's also, each of the airlines I mentioned, they're all part of airlines. 2 SkyTeam, 1 World and stuff. So that means the partnerships, let's say ANA, well, not Japan because they've been kind of restricted, but let's say, United, you can actually do code share flights. So I can buy a ticket to United but find Lufthansa out of Chicago. Well, if I'm going to Frankfurt and it gets delayed, then, obviously that impacts me in Chicago, and it impacts, what's supposed to happen in Frankfurt. But, that's also that's a partnership. Same version, if I'm supposed to go to Frankfurt and connect, let's say there to Athens, well, then that impacts me. I miss my connecting flight. Then what happens? So just, and let's say if I put it to United, so next thing you know, I'm talking to both Lufthansa and United people trying to get resolved. Because they're taking something we booked on one and working on the other. So, but anyway, that's a different story, like different topics overall. But just kind of an example of just how chaotic things are and just, broad picture of it. So, anyway, I'm going to land this plane here soon. This is the New Berlin Airport over here in front of us. I flew over it. I actually thought I was kind of flying back towards it, but look at that arrow thing. That was useless. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I thought it'd be nice to talk about the topic and really, obviously there's a little cussing in here, unless I am, but it's like, it's just it's very fascinating reading about what's going on with the airline industry in these airports. It's not surprising, but it's disappointing just kind of how almost oblivious that they are to their issues, at least to maybe some solutions. Now, granted, I am being very facetious. I don't entirely know the financial pictures. I've seen the earnings and stuff. They're still crawling out a hole. So I don't know. Maybe it's not truly feasible. But I will say this. Some of the issues I did lay out earlier, again with the pilots, that was known before COVID, and they really did nothing to address it. They always kept acting like kicking the can down the road. Well, tomorrow came, basically, in a way, and now they're really screwed. They're fucked. And again with the, and when you lay off 30,000 people, it takes a while to bring them back. Let alone you got to bring new people and train them and stuff. So anyway, it's just like the big defense I always give them is that there was no good way to prepare when to truly come out of COVID in regards to demand. It's just a lot of these issues. They just didn't seem to have any. They were ready to rush out without preparing for it, and then at the same time, just some long term. They really, they just have, some of these are almost just like the chickens came home to roost scenario that did. And, same with the airport. The airport's is a different situation entirely, and it's going to vary a lot by each airport because, the airports are run usually either by, local governments. I'll be honest, I don't know entirely, like, if Berlin's just run by the city of Berlin, or it's like partially Berlin and run by the, country of Germany. But it's like Chicago here is run by the city of Chicago, or New York's run by, it's like Newark, it's like New York, New Jersey Transit Authority. There's a group out there that runs it in terms of public finance, and that also comes down to the contracts with airport workers and like, how's, sorry, let's just be careful. Anyway, and those contracts. Same with Europe and stuff. So there's a lot of elements there that are, I could probably spend hours to figure out, or at least understand it better. I just do know it's like, I think we're at a tipping point where I think a lot of the industry needs some changes. And that changes like go back to the 1950s and, where, I got, first class and stuff. Like full, like, what it used to be like the golden age. But like, better ways to understand, what's going on. And I've been trying to reduce my airspeed forever. Alright. See if this works. We're gonna come in hot. Anyway, so it's just kind of, it really just felt like it's just been a long time coming with some of these issues come to fruition. And I hope there might be, maybe it's a wake-up call and stuff. I'm not entirely optimistic there, but, because I love flying and stuff, but it's like, it's just sometimes I just see the, it's just almost like complete deniability. It's just like, read the writing on the wall, dudes, and just, kind of, start throwing some ideas. Think of something, go or talk to your pilot, see, or go out there and, asking people who might be interested, what would it take? What will help them to get there? Do they even understand the process? I mean, that's probably an educational limit, too, for people that might want to be a pilot. There's a lot of things there, I think, that just truly aren't touched or explored, at least not very well from a public standpoint. There might be information. I mean, I'm sure there's always information to become an airline pilot, but it's like, why aren't the airlines trying to promote this more? Why aren't they trying to, maybe go to college campuses and stuff, or high schools, try to see, gauge interest and where you can start and stuff. So, and that's just, spitballing at the very end right there, but it's like, it's just kind of just, unbelievable. I just don't really think of anything. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm not going to make any promises to do anything quickly or anything like that, but hopefully I might have some more ideas and stuff on what to do and so forth. So, anyway, thank you for watching and take care.